Beth Finch, and I'm the Marketing and Communication Specialist for Manhattan Psychology Group. And we are very excited and pleased to be joining you all today and to have Dr. Francine Zeltzer present on home routines and independence and success for you all. And then
Sorry about that.
Yeah, I'm going to go over a little bit about Manhattan Psychology Group and who we are first. So we are a multidisciplinary practice, which means we actually offer a robust variety of services for children, teens, adolescents, adults, couples. We really can provide support for any member of a family. We provide psychological services that are evidence-based treatments, including cognitive behavioral therapy. We provide support groups, individual therapy, parent training groups for parents of children with ADHD, anxiety, or behavioral difficulties. We provide social skills groups, anxiety groups for children and teens. So we really have a variety of psychological services available, both for individuals, families, parents, teens, you name it. We also offer testing and evaluations. So for anything from perhaps an accommodation at school or extra time for testing at school to a diagnosis for autism or ADHD or other learning differences or developmental delays. We also do autism testing and evaluations. So both neurological and psychoeducational testing. And then finally, we offer tutoring and educational services. So this can be executive functioning training and coaching, behavioral tutoring, or academic tutoring with special educators. So our staff are licensed, trained, certified, and we are very proud to offer our comprehensive compassionate care. Our mission is to support, as I said, individuals and families, and as many as possible who experience psychological, developmental, or educational challenges. And then lastly, our vision is to create a future where individuals and their families feel supported, connected, and empowered together. So we are very pleased to offer workshops like these to help parents feel more empowered and equipped when they're parenting their children, for example. And then now I'm very pleased to introduce our speaker for tonight. Dr. Francine Zeltzer is our Clinical Director of Psychological Services and a child and adolescent and adult psychologist at Manhattan Psychology Group. As you can see in her bio, her focus includes treatment of ADHD, anxiety, depressive disorders, conduct and disruptive disorders, family therapy, psychological testing, and school-related behaviors. She's also a parent herself, so she's a wonderful resource for us and for our families, and you all are in for a treat to have her not only present to you all tonight, but be available to answer any questions you may have. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Zeltzer.
Thank you, Beth, and thank you for joining us tonight. If you just came into the webinar, please add your children's ages to the chat box. That way I can know how old the children are of the parents that are participating today. So welcome. Tonight we're going to be talking a lot about how we can promote independence in our children, because the more independent our children feel, the more successful they'll be long term. And the focus of this webinar is going to be on how you could set up routines within your home to promote independence. I would like this webinar to be as interactive as possible. I have the chat box open, so if at any point you have any questions or you want to present a situation that you're dealing with, please feel free to put it in the chat box, and I'll pretty much stop and ask for questions between every slide. Okay, so we're going to start by talking about how you can provide structure and routine for your children. And the focus of today's presentation is going to be on the daily schedule. So often parents ask, what is a daily schedule? What does that mean? So a daily schedule is everything that happens from the moment your family wakes up until the moment that everyone in your family is asleep. And that includes everything such as meal times, events, and daily living activities such as wake time and bedtime and hygiene activities. So when we talk about the daily schedule, we know that our schedules vary depending on the day of the week, whether there's school, whether there's work. So when we talk about creating a daily schedule, we know that our daily schedule doesn't always look the same. Sometimes Monday looks very different from Tuesday. Sometimes a weekday looks very different from a weekday. When we think about scheduling and planning our day-to-day activities, we often tend to, as adults and as parents, make the schedules ourselves and then dictate those schedules to our children. So I often like to encourage parents, whenever possible, to involve their child in the process of scheduling activities. Now, I know most children here, most parents here have children that are very young. So I don't expect that you're sitting down with your child and going through, what time do you want to eat breakfast? What I mean is to give your child a choice. Would you rather do swim or would you rather do tennis? Would you rather have a snack first or would you rather do homework first? Even these little choices where you can involve your child, it feels empowering for them. What's most important, and one of the themes that you're going to hear throughout this presentation, is how critical it is to be consistent. Now, there is a big difference between consistency and rigidity. Consistency can still offer a great deal of flexibility. What consistency is it's sticking with the same schedule whenever possible. Having a consistent schedule allows your child to understand what is expected of them. It helps them know what is coming next, helps them better manage transitions throughout their day, and helps them be more organized. When a child has a consistent schedule, they really know what is coming next, and that routine helps them thrive throughout the day, every day. So before we go on, does anyone have any questions so far? And if you are new to joining the presentation, please add your children's ages to the chat box. Okay. Oops. So we're going to start by talking about the schedule in general. So when we talk about creating a daily schedule, what does that mean? So when you think about and reflect on your family's schedule, how can you break it down to the smallest pieces? So that would involve considering your morning routine. What time do you wake up in the morning? What do you do from the time that you wake up until the children wake up? Or are the children waking up first? What has to happen in the morning before you start your day? That includes meal times, hygiene activities, dressing activities, anything that goes on from the time you wake up in the morning until the time you start your first activity, whether that activity is within your house or outside of your house. We also want to consider any type of meals. How many meals does your family have each day? How many of those meals are within the home? How many of those meals are outside of the home, whether they're at school or at work? How many snacks are needed throughout the day? What academic activities do your children participate in throughout the day, whether that's attending school, completing homework, attending daycare, different projects or activities related to academics? What activities and events your family is engaged in? Are there extracurricular activities, religious activities, special events, parties, family events? And factoring in leisure time. How much time do your children have each day for playtime? How much time do they have for screen time? Do you spend time as a family? What do various members of your family do to relax? And also taking into consideration travel and transition time. So we often think about our morning, and we don't always factor how long does it take us to get from our apartment to daycare? How long does it take to get from daycare to work, and is there more traffic on Mondays than on Fridays? And last but definitely not least is our evening routine or our wind down routine and bedtime. So taking all of these things into consideration is very important when you're mapping out your daily schedule. And you want to think about the activity itself. What is involved in the activity? What is the general timeline of that activity? So for example, your morning routine, that starts at what time, and what time is it expected to end before the next activity starts? And how much time is needed for that activity? And that could be a range, right? It could be, well, our evening routine and our bedtime generally takes 30 minutes, but it could take up to 40 minutes, and some nights it only takes 20 minutes. So you would be allocating about 20 to 45 minutes for evening routine and bedtime. Does anyone have any questions about what a general schedule might consist of? Please feel free to write any questions you have in the chat box. Okay. So when we talk about our daily schedule, it's important to consider different variations because every day looks different for every family. Sometimes families' weekdays look very consistent, and then their weekends look different than their weekdays. Other families, their weekends look consistent, but their weekdays are inconsistent. So you want to break your schedule down based on a day-by-day basis. So when I talk about a weekday, that is a school day or a work day. If we're talking about a school day, it's from September to June. We're talking about work days in general, we're talking Monday through Friday, but that might not be for your family. Maybe your family works on Saturdays. But weekdays are days in general that you have very time-specific commitments that require you and your children to be at a certain place at a certain time. Then we also want to take into consideration weekends or holidays, and that would include a Saturday or a Sunday, or any 1 to 3 days where there's no school. That might be a long weekend or a religious holiday. And then we also want to take into consideration vacations. So I generally consider a vacation 3 or more consecutive days without work or school. And then other considerations, especially in the world we're living in now, are there periods of time where your family might be home quarantined or just sick, right? Maybe you're not forced to stay home, but you have a sick child who's home and you know that they're going to be out of school for at least 2 or 3 days. Are you home for a religious observance or event? So all of these variations will involve different schedules, and often families have different schedules just within a work week, depending on the parents' work commitments and what is happening from the time the child is dropped off at school or the child's dropped off at daycare, who will be picking them up. And Monday might look very different than Tuesday. Okay, so I see one question. The question is, how do you schedule weekend days that are very unstructured and dependent on unpredictable variables? That is a fantastic question. And I actually have a slide on weekend schedules. So if it's okay with you, we're going to go through that slide. And then if you have other questions after that, we'll talk about it in more detail. What I want to talk about first is the school days. So I want you to answer in the chat box. I have actually worked in the schools for over the past decade with young children. And there is one time of the school day that often is the time of the day that children are the most distressed. We see more dysregulation at this particular time of the school day than any other time. So would anyone like to take a guess right in the chat box? What time of the school day do you think that is? Do you think it's at recess? Do you think it's after recess? Do you think it's around dismissal or during a test or upon arrival? What time of the day do you think is the most stressful for children, especially young children, at school or at daycare? So I see one person saying right before pickup. Anyone else have a guess? Okay. So actually, okay, I see arrival and before pickup. So actually, the number one time when children tend to be distressed is upon arrival. We see more tears as children walk into the building than at any other point of the day. That's not to say that pickup or recess or exams are not stressful, but it seems that families really struggle in the morning. There is so much to do and so little time, and we're often rushing to start the day. So I first want to talk about our mornings. How can we avoid the morning rush? Because mornings can be so stressful for adults and children alike. The first suggestion is to be as proactive as possible. What can possibly be done ahead of time to prepare your family so that you're not struggling the morning of getting everything together before you get out the door? So when you think about what materials your child needs for the school day or the day at daycare, that often includes their school bag or their daycare bag. They need their clothing for that day. Sometimes picking out clothing can be very distressing, especially if your child doesn't want to wear what you picked out for them. And then also, what meals do you need to prepare? Does your child need to bring a packed lunch with them to school or to daycare? Do you need to bring a packed lunch with you? Do they eat breakfast at home or do they eat breakfast at school? Which of these activities could you possibly prepare in advance, even if that's preparing it either the night before or preparing it the morning of, but before the children wake up so that everything is set and ready to go? So parents usually find that it's very helpful to prepare all of the materials the night before so that the bag is ready and waiting by the door. And also to pick out the clothing the night before. I know many families pick out the clothing for the full week for their child on Sunday to make it easier. You just go down the pile. And then to have those conversations with your child at bedtime. What would you like to eat for breakfast tomorrow? Especially if you have a child who is a picky eater and meal times tend to be a struggle. You also want to calculate how much time is needed in the morning and set an alarm that not only gets you just enough time to get up, ready, and out, but that gives you a little bit more time. So with children, often getting them up in time is not a problem when they're much younger. I often hear that that the kids are up for so long, often earlier than the parents would want them to be up in the morning, but then yet they still find themselves rushing to get out the door in time. So even if you don't need to set an alarm to get yourself or your children up because your children are already awake, can you set an alarm that indicates it's time to actually start getting ready? So let's say your children are up at 5 o'clock in the morning and you need to be out the door by 8:30. And it sounds like, oh my, I have so much time in the morning between 5 a.m. and 8:30, but somehow I always end up rushing. Maybe you want to set an alarm for 7 a.m. where at 7 a.m. we put away all the toys and we start getting ready for work or for school or for daycare. And we actually start our routine activities so that we allow enough time to finish all of the things that we have to do before we have to leave. And you also want to consider which activities you have that might require a schedule change. Perhaps you have to be to work early on Wednesdays because you have a team meeting at Wednesday at 8:30 and you have to leave a half an hour earlier. So how can you adjust your overall schedule with yourself and your children so that Wednesday mornings aren't a particular struggle? Any questions about the morning routine? Okay. Now let's talk about our afternoons. So afternoons tend to vary based on every family's situation. Some parents are able to pick up their children right after school or right at the end of daycare and then take them home. Other families rely on family members or caregivers to pick up the child from school or daycare and get them back into the home. And sometimes there are variations between the different days. Sometimes mom might pick up on certain days and a caregiver might pick up other days, or grandma or an aunt might pick up. So it's really important to lay out what each day looks like and plan accordingly. Now, the younger children aren't coming home to do homework, but I like to use this first then mentality, whether or not there's homework or any other responsibility. We want to set our children up for success by teaching them to take care of the things that they need to do before they do the things that they want to do. So that might be as simple as taking off your shoes and washing your hands before you have a snack or before you go to play. You want to do your work first, which could be taking off your shoes before you play. And we also want to consider what extracurricular activities and household tasks are occurring on a daily basis, and how do we schedule our time so that we're not rushed or pressured to get everything that we have to get done in time to have an appropriate bedtime. Any questions about afternoons or this work first, then play strategy? All right, and now let's talk about bedtime. So bedtime also is another challenging part of the day that many parents really struggle with. And children, like adults, need time to wind down before they go right to sleep. So when we think about our evening routine or our evening activities, we often want to consider hygiene activities such as bathing and brushing our teeth, as well as leisure activities, time to play, time to relax, time to enjoy watching a TV show or spending time talking, whatever relaxation or leisure activities your child and your family enjoy. And then bedtime. So how do we calculate bedtime? Well, children, depending on their age, need at least 9 to 12 hours of sleep. Kids younger than the age of 5 or 6 often need more sleep than 12 hours within a 24-hour period of time. So we want to calculate, if my child wakes up every day at 5 o'clock in the morning, what time should I be putting my child to sleep so that they get enough sleep so that they're not overtired? So let's say you calculate that your child needs to be asleep by 8 p.m. That means that bedtime routine needs to start well before 8 p.m. because your child needs to actually be asleep at 8 p.m., not starting the bedtime routine at 8 p.m. So you want to consider, how long does your bedtime routine take from beginning to end? And how long does your child take typically to fall asleep from the time the bedtime routine ends until the time that they're asleep? And then plan accordingly so that you have enough time and that your child is well rested. So we were talking about work then play, and I see a question. It says, what kind of work activities would you suggest be incorporated for a 3-year-old? What is within their reach? That is a great question. So one of the great ways that you can introduce this for younger children, even as young as 6 months old, is the idea of playing with one toy at a time, right? So if you have out the blocks and your child is playing with the blocks, and then they want to start playing with the cars, you want to say, okay, I want you to put away the blocks first, and then we could take out the cars. So you're teaching them to work, which is to clean up first, clean up what they're currently playing with and now done with, before they take out another activity. And that doesn't mean that you have to restrict your child to only playing with one toy at a time. Perhaps your child likes to play with the cars on top of the blocks. But as they're transitioning from one activity to the next, a good way to model this if then or first then is to clean up what they're doing before they transition to the next activity. Another really great activity is having them put their personal belongings in a designated spot. So for example, even if you're taking off your child's shoes, if they're not yet able to take off their own shoes, you could take off the shoes and you could say, can you go put these shoes in the closet, or can you go put these shoes in the corner, or you can ask them to put their jacket on the chair. Any activity that they are capable of doing, having them do that before they do the more desirable activity. Does that make sense? Excellent. Does anyone have any other questions about first then, or any morning, afternoon, or evening activities? Any questions about bedtime? Any questions about the mornings? Okay, so now we're going to talk about the weekends, but before we do that, let's first, the question is, how long before bedtime should dinner happen? So that is one of those questions where it really depends. It depends on what is best for your family. What can your family manage? What is your family's schedule, and what works best for your child? So some families have to rush dinner and bathing and bedtime into a very short period of time. Maybe you're only getting into your home around 6:37 and your child's bedtime is 8 o'clock and they have to eat and you still have to prepare dinner. So you might be doing all of these activities within 60 to 90 minutes. Other families that come home earlier, some families decide that they want to give their child a full dinner upon coming home from daycare or school because their child is starving at that time and they don't want them to fill up on snacks. So some families will decide to give their child a full meal earlier in the afternoon, evening, around between 4 and 6 p.m. And then they'll give them a light snack around 6 or 7 p.m. before bedtime. So that's a personal choice. The only thing that I often do advise is reducing screen time 30 minutes before bedtime. So screen time is very stimulating for the brain, especially for young children. And it's very difficult sometimes for children to unwind after screen time. So if you can turn off the screens before the bedtime routine starts and do a more calming bedtime routine, which often would include bathing, brushing teeth, reading books, singing songs, telling stories, that's a really nice way to unwind at the end of the day. What's also helpful with bedtime routines is to have a series of activities that always occur in the same order. So for example, maybe your child doesn't bathe every single day, but on the days that they bathe, maybe the first thing that you do is you go and take a bath. And then after they take a bath, they go put on their pajamas. And then after pajamas, they go and they brush their teeth. And then after that, they use the bathroom if they're potty trained, or they get a fresh diaper if they're not, and then you transition into their bedroom. And then once you're in the bedroom for the rest of the activities, which might be reading books, telling stories, singing songs, whatever your actual activities are, but to do them in a consistent manner, because that is a form of chaining where one event triggers the next event. So if your child is doing bath, pajamas, book, bed, every time they see that book come out, they know this is my last activity before it's time for me to go to sleep. So that book is a prompt to the child that bedtime is coming very soon. It's almost like a warning for them, without you having to say, remember, after this book, we're going to sleep. Does anyone have any questions about that? Okay, so now we're going to talk about those weekends and holidays. So somebody asked earlier about weekends and holidays, because weekends and holidays tend to be a much more relaxed and casual, and we don't often have a set schedule, nor do we want a set schedule on the weekends and holidays, and that is okay. You still want to maintain some sort of schedule. So your schedule might be, we wake up when we wake up, especially if your family likes to sleep in. That's okay. But what happens after you wake up? Do we still brush our teeth first thing, or do we eat breakfast first before we brush our teeth? At what point do we get dressed? All of these activities are still part of a schedule, even if it's not a schedule that involves you leaving the house or going out and doing certain things by a certain time. So for the weekends, you want to maintain some sort of a schedule. If you have any kind of recurring activities, that might be a religious activity. Maybe you go to church every Sunday, or extracurricular activities. Maybe your children are involved in sports or different activities that are scheduled during the weekends. That becomes part of your schedule. And it's really important, especially during those cold winter months, to stay active, not only for your physical health, but also for your mental health. So some ideas as we're approaching those cold winter months would be to create an obstacle course in your home, maybe playing something like The Floor is Lava, where you put down different books that your child could navigate from the couch to the table so that they're walking around instead of just staying stationary. Setting up a scavenger hunt within your home where you're giving your child clues on how to find different items, doing an at-home dance party, working out as a family. Any kind of activities that gets your child and your family moving is very helpful. Many families, especially families that have two working parents, tend to do a lot of their errands and household tasks during the weekends because that's when they have the time to do these activities. These activities might be grocery shopping, laundry, tidying up, any activity that is needed for the work week. Whenever possible, it's really nice to include your children in your daily activities, even those activities that are chores. And you might be thinking, oh, but it's so much easier if I just do it myself, or my child's really not going to want to do this. But it's really great, even if you could just include them for a portion of the activity. Maybe you don't want to bring your 3-year-old with you to the grocery store because it turns what would be a 1-hour errand into a 3-hour errand. But so you don't have to. But what you could do is you could sit down with your 3-year-old before you leave to go to the grocery store and ask them to pick 3 snacks that they want to eat this week with their lunch. And then you could give them choices. Would you like to have apple, or would you like to have strawberry? And they're, in essence, helping you make your grocery list, your shopping list. So they're taking part in the activity. And then when you get home from grocery shopping, you could have your child help empty the bag, even if they're emptying the grocery bag from the grocery bag onto the floor, or passing something from the grocery bag to you so that you could put it into the refrigerator. These real life tasks help teach your child problem solving skills. And it's nice to do these activities as a family. And this could be as simple as sorting socks, or sorting darks and lights, or having your child help you by cleaning their own room, or passing you a paper towel if you're doing cleaning. Any activity that you could engage your child in, even part of the process, is wonderful. And last but definitely not least, I want to remind everybody that Sunday night is a school night. Many families forget that Sunday night is the same as any other weeknight where the child and parent often has to wake up at a specific time that next day to get up and out and ready to go to school or to work. So treating Sunday night the same way you would a Monday night or a Thursday night is really important. Make sure you allow yourself and your child enough time to prepare for the day ahead or for the week ahead. And that is a really good way of avoiding the Monday blues. And Mondays tend to be one of the most difficult mornings of the week. So does anyone have any questions about weekends or holidays? Any follow-up questions? Because I know somebody wanted to talk about weekends before. Okay. Okay, so now we're going to talk about daily schedules, and I absolutely love visual schedules. Visual schedules are great ways to engage your child in the daily routine. Visual schedules can be used for the full day or for one part of the day. I often recommend that parents use visual schedules for parts of the days that are particularly challenging. So if a parent has a really hard time at bedtime, it's helpful to have a visual schedule for the bedtime routine so that the child is able to see the different steps that they're going to engage in or the different activities that they are going to participate in leading up to bedtime. So children thrive from routine, and they're more likely to be independent when they know what is expected of them. Younger children don't know how to read yet, so visual schedules can use pictures instead of words or pictures with words to show your children the order of events. They help children understand and manage expectations, and they're able to know what is coming next and what is going to be asked of them. And it often empowers children so that they feel like they are in control of their routine. Children love to tell their parents what they're supposed to do next. And when they have a visual schedule, your child is able to interact with that schedule. Many parents will have Velcro on their visual schedule where the child could take off the activity after they completed it. Or if you have pictures, they could turn over the picture. And then it's so much fun for young kids to answer the question like, I wonder what I'm supposed to do next. What are we supposed to do after we put on our pajamas? And then you might point to your visual schedule, and a child will get so excited that they're telling their parent what to do instead of the parent telling them. One of the most enjoyable activities that I heard from parents that I like to do with my own kids as well is to create our own visual schedule. And it's so much fun for kids to act out the different activities. So go around your home and say, all right, we're going to take a picture of what it looks like to brush your teeth. And you have your child pretend that they're brushing their teeth and you take a picture. And then you have your child pretend to lay down in their bed and you take a picture. And then when you're setting up that schedule, you could just lay out one picture after the next. And your child's not just looking at pictures of activities, but they're actually looking at pictures of themselves engaged in those activities. And that is really reinforcing for children. Any questions about visual schedules? Okay, so this is our last slide, and I'm going to go over the do's and don'ts about scheduling. And this is based on years and years of working with families and hearing their feedbacks about what has gone really well and what has been really challenging for families. So my first suggestion is to plan wisely. And what I mean is to avoid overschedule. So often I hear families struggling because they plan the most fun day ever for their child. And by the time they are done with activity 2, the child is melting down. And what they thought was going to be the funnest day ever turns into the most stressful day ever. So before you schedule back-to-back activities for your young child, consider what time of the day is the activity that you're thinking of scheduling? What is your child capable of doing? And how fatigued does your child tend to get? If your 2-year-old naps every day around 1 p.m. and you really want to enroll your child in a soccer class, but the soccer class is also at 1 p.m., it's probably not going to go so well to put your child in the 1 p.m. soccer time because they're going to be exhausted and they're going to miss their nap that day and they're going to be cranky. So consider what your child is capable of and rest assured that one activity is more than enough. Your child does not need to be enrolled in extracurricular activities every day. They do not need to rush from one activity to the next. As long as they are being interacted with and being provided with opportunities for enrichment within the home and within the school and throughout the day, there is no need to rush from one activity to the next. In fact, more often than not, the most enjoyable activities are the ones that happen organically as you're walking to an activity where a child's actually able to stop and smell the flowers and do something spontaneously and not feel rushed from one thing to the next. Any questions about overscheduling? Okay, and then lastly, I want to recommend that parents avoid surprising their children. I know that surprises sound so wonderful and exciting, and you probably cannot wait to say, surprise, guess what? I enrolled you in a new class, or we're going to have the best day ever. We're going to try this new place. Unfortunately, especially with young kids, surprises don't go well because new experiences can be overstimulating. They could be confusing. There's all these new people and new rules and new environments, and there's too many transitions, and the kids are not having the fun that you had hoped that they would. So rather than surprise your child, try being proactive and preparing them for a new activity. Tell them about the new activity, explain it to them by giving step-by-step instructions or step-by-step directions about what they are going to do. Give reminders as the activity is coming up and provide them with opportunities to learn about the activity before they participate. So maybe you're putting your child in a music class. Is there a video on the website of the music class that you're enrolling them in that the child could watch so they could see what a music class might look like from the comfort of your home? Can they read a book about a music class? Do they have any musical instruments at home that they could practice with before the music class? The better you prepare your child, the more successful they will be when they are asked to engage in a new activity. Does anyone have any questions about anything we discussed, about the do's and don'ts, the daily schedule, anything so far? Okay. And the last thing I want to talk about is feedback. How can you take your child's feedback to improve your parenting practices? And the number one thing I suggest is following your child's lead. Seeing what activities your child expresses interest in, and then trying those activities. Maybe you played soccer as a child and you really want your child to have that same wonderful experience that you had, and you put them in soccer class, but they're more interested in music. Try to let your child try music in addition to soccer, or maybe you'll do soccer in the fall and you'll do music in the winter. It is okay to try new things. You want to expose your child to different activities and then observe, what do they seem to enjoy? What do they seem to excel at? What do they feel good about? What makes them proud? And then use those observations to inform your decision making in terms of activities. And also provide your child with a lot of praise and encouragement along the way. As parents, we often find ourselves giving a lot of feedback to our children when they're not necessarily doing the right thing. But then we often tend to be quiet when they are doing the right thing, because no news is good news and everything's going smoothly. You want to catch your child being good. What that means is that you want to give as much, if not more, positive feedback when they're doing the right thing as you would give corrective feedback if they're not doing the right thing. And as parents, we have such a tendency to say stop or no or don't do that when your child's engaging in negative behavior. So instead of telling them what you don't want them to do, try to change your feedback by telling them what you do want them to do. So a perfect example of this is if your child is running through your home. Our instinctive response would often be stop running, or no, you're not supposed to run. So instead of saying what they're not supposed to do, can you say, slow down, please, or I would really like it if you walked. And then the second they do the behavior that you're asking them to do, provide that positive praise and feedback. Thank you so much for walking. I love how you're walking right now. Children respond so well to attention. So the more positive attention that you could give them for doing the right thing, the more likely that behavior would occur again in the future. So that is the presentation on routines. Does anyone have any questions about anything that we discussed or anything related to promoting independence and setting children up for success? Please feel free to put any questions you have in the chat box. All right, I don't see any questions, but I will stay on for a little bit longer. I do want to let you know if you have any questions after this presentation, or if you have anything that you want to discuss that maybe you don't feel comfortable discussing on this public workshop, please feel free to reach out to me directly. My email address is on the screen. And if you are looking for any kind of services, whether you're interested in services for yourself, some parent training, parent management training, maybe a parenting group, or services for your child, please feel free to email us at info@ or check out our website, which lists all of our services. So one of the questions I have is, how do you balance teaching persistence with letting them explore new things? That's a great question. So there's many different ways to teach this. I often like to use an accountability approach. So often when we enroll our children in activities, we're enrolling them for a set period of time. Usually it's for a certain number of weeks or a semester or a season. So I like to encourage children to follow through with their commitments. So let's say, for example, you sign your child up for gymnastics, and after the third session of gymnastics, they really don't like gymnastics and they're giving you a really hard time every time it's time to leave the house and get ready for gymnastics. You want to talk to your child about the commitment that you and them made to trying gymnastics. So you might say, okay, I understand that you don't like gymnastics and gymnastics is hard and you don't want to do gymnastics again. And I'm not going to make you do gymnastics again after we finish this round of gymnastics. So you might look at a calendar with them and you might say, well, gymnastics is 6 classes and we've already done 2 classes. So we have 4 classes left. And you might even give the child, especially an older child, a pass. You might say, out of the 4 classes that are left, I'll let you miss one, but we have to go to the other three. Do you want to do the miss one today? Or do you want to go today and then you can miss one in the future? And it's okay for them to finish gymnastics and then never do gymnastics again. But you want to hold your child accountable for at least following something through to completion and finishing their commitment for that trial. Does that make sense? I'm so glad that you found the workshop helpful. Thank you for that feedback. Does anyone have any other questions? Okay, I see something in Q&A. Will the recording of the workshop be available? Yes, we are recording the workshop, so we hope that your organization will be able to share it. But if not, please feel free to email me or email us directly, and we will get you a recording of the workshop. Does anyone have any other questions? All right, well, I'll be on for the next few minutes. I want to thank you. Okay, sorry, I see one question. Any practical tips for bedtime? So many practical tips. One of the things that we discussed earlier was when it comes to bedtime, consistency is the absolute most important thing. And the order of operations for bedtime cues your child's body and mind that it's almost time to go to sleep. So doing the events in a specific order and always having the same last thing you do right before you say goodnight. So if that is reading a book, you always want to do book, then bed. If you have a younger child and the last thing you do is bottle, maybe you'll do bottle and bed. Whatever you do, you always want it to be the same. And you can modify that as your child gets older. With younger children, I would say 12 months and below, I often use the same exact book every single night before bedtime because they see that book and they know exactly what's coming. And then as they get a little bit older, we start rotating the books. So they're no longer hearing Goodnight Moon on repeat, but now they're able to hear Goodnight Moon and they're able to hear other books, but it's always book then bed. And if you're using books, you always want to be consistent in terms of how many books they get, because as your child gets older, you're going to start getting those, please, can we have one more book? Can we have one more song? Can I have one more sip of water? So you always want to be very consistent in terms of how many you do. So let's say we're doing 3 books. You have them pick out the 3 books before you start book 1. And then after you finish book 1, you want to say, how many books do we have left? And the child answers 2. And you say, okay, which 2 books do we have left? And they point to the 2 books and then you read book 2. And then you say, how many books do we have left? And they say 1. You say, what's going to happen when we finish this book? And they say bedtime. And you say, yes, after this book, we're going right to sleep. We're not going to read any more books. If you ask for another book, the answer is going to be no, because this is our last book. So by revisiting exactly what's going to happen and including your child in part of that routine helps set them up for success.